Three of the most powerful men on the planet just signed away their marriage and ripped apart a bond the universe said could never be undone. And they did it because of what happened to a crippled mute Omega. This kind of story deserves to be shared. Tap like, share this with someone who needs a good cry today, and subscribe so we can keep bringing you moments that matter. The envelope landed on the kitchen table at exactly 7:14 in the morning. Not thrown, not slammed, placed deliberately, carefully, the way you handle something that already weighs more than your hands can carry. Kendrick Moretti, the eldest of the triplets by 4 minutes, set it down with 2 fingers. His brothers flanked him. Dennis stood to his left, arms crossed, a bruise of exhaustion beneath both eyes. Henry, the youngest, the one everyone always assumed was the gentlest, stood to the right, and his expression carried nothing gentle at all. Their husband, Atus Crane, sat across from them, a mug of coffee halfway to his lips. "What is that?" Atus asked. "Open it," Kendrick replied. Atus set the mug down. He pulled the envelope toward himself with one hand, slid a finger beneath the seal, and removed the document inside. 3 pages. Crisp, legal, notarized at the bottom of the final page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. 3 signatures, Kendrick's sharp and angular, Dennis's compact, Henry's looping cursive, already filled the lines at the bottom. One signature line remained blank. Atus stared at the pages for a long time. Then he laughed. A short, dry sound with no warmth in it. "You're joking." "Nobody is joking," Dennis answered, his voice flat as pavement. "Because of the Omega?" Atus leaned back in his chair. "You're divorcing me because of a nobody? A cripple who can't even talk?" Henry's hand came down on the table. Not a slam, just a firm, flat placement of his palm that somehow silenced the entire room. "His name is Jaime, and what you did to him is the reason those papers exist." Atus scanned their faces, one by one, looking for a crack, looking for hesitation or guilt or any sign that this was a bluff, the kind of power play their family used to negotiate deals and corner enemies. He found nothing. "I didn't do anything illegal," Atus stated. "No," Kendrick agreed. "You didn't. That's almost worse." 12 days earlier, the Moretti household had acquired an unexpected guest. It was Henry who found him, Jaime Wilder, age 22, sitting on a bench outside a grocery store on 9th and Maple at 11 o'clock at night, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too large and a pair of sneakers with the soles separating from the canvas. His left leg was wrapped in a brace from knee to ankle. A pair of crutches leaned against the bench beside him. Henry had been driving home from a late meeting. He almost didn't stop, but something about the way the young man sat, perfectly still, eyes open, watching the parking lot like he was memorizing it, made Henry pull into the lot and roll down his window. "Hey, you okay?" No answer. The young man turned to look at him, and Henry noticed 2 things simultaneously. His eyes were the color of rain-washed pennies, and his expression held absolutely no fear. Not bravery, not defiance, just absence. Like fear was a language he had heard so many times it no longer registered. Henry tried again. "Do you need help?" The young man opened his mouth. No sound came out. He closed it, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small notepad. He wrote something in quick, slanted letters and held it up. "I'm fine. Just waiting." "Waiting for what?" A pause. Then the pen moved again. "For the store to open. It's warm by the door in the morning." Henry sat with that sentence for a very long time, long enough for the engine to idle through 2 full cycles. "Get in the car," he finally spoke. "I know a place that's warm right now." The young man, Jaime, studied him. Then he wrote one more thing. "Are you safe?" And that question, aimed at a Moretti, aimed at a man whose last name made prosecutors lose sleep. That question broke something open in Henry's chest that he didn't know had been sealed shut. "Yeah," Henry replied, and meant it more than he had meant almost anything. "I'm safe." Jaime came home with Henry that night. It was supposed to be temporary. One night on the guest room bed, a hot meal, maybe a referral to a shelter with available beds in the morning. That was the plan. But Kendrick woke up at 5 a.m. the way he always did, and when he padded into the kitchen to start the coffee maker, he found Jaime already there. Not eating, not rummaging, sitting at the kitchen table with his notepad, drawing small, detailed sketches of the fruit bowl, the window frame, the pattern of light on the tile floor. Kendrick watched him for a full minute before Jaime noticed. When he did, he startled, just slightly, a quick intake of air. then held up his notepad. Sorry. I didn't touch anything. I can leave. You drew that just now? Kendrick asked, looking at the fruit bowl sketch. It was good. Better than good. The shading was precise, the proportions exact, the banana's brown spots rendered with the kind of attention that suggested Jaime saw things other people walked past. Jaime nodded. You want coffee? Jaime hesitated. Then wrote. I don't want to be trouble. Coffee isn't trouble. Kendrick pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet. How do you take it? I've never had it. Kendrick paused with the pot in his hand. 22 years old and never had a cup of coffee. He filed that away, not with pity, but with the kind of cold, cataloging attention that made him dangerous in boardrooms and back alleys alike. He poured Jaime a cup, added cream and sugar without asking because a first cup should be kind. Jaime took a sip and his eyes went wide, and the corners of his mouth turned upward. The first expression besides blankness Kendrick had seen on his face, and something about that tiny, startled smile rearranged the furniture inside Kendrick's ribcage. He sat down across from Jaime, cradled his own mug, and spoke. Tell me your story, whatever you're comfortable with. Take your time. Jaime's pen hovered over the notepad. Then he began to write. Came in fragments. Sentences that stopped and started. Words crossed out and replaced. Pages turned with the careful precision of someone who had learned that every word cost something. He had grown up in foster care. 7 homes in 16 years. The leg injury was from a fall at age 14. It had healed wrong because the foster family at the time couldn't afford the surgery and didn't care enough to find someone who could. His voice had disappeared at age 8. The doctors called it psychogenic mutism. His vocal cords worked fine, but something in his brain, some deep and self-protective wiring, had decided that silence was safer than sound. He had aged out of the system at 18. For years on his own since then. Odd jobs when he could find them, dishwashing, envelope stuffing, inventory counting. Nothing lasted. The leg made physical labor unreliable, and the silence made interviews impossible. He had never been violent, never been arrested, never been addicted to anything. He had simply fallen through every net that was supposed to catch people, and landed on a bench outside a grocery store on 9th and Maple, drawing pictures of things that would never belong to him. Kendrick read every page Jaime offered. Then he looked up and spoke, not with sympathy, not with the performative compassion that rich men used to feel better about themselves, but with the plain, unadorned honesty of someone who recognized damage because he carried his own. You're staying here, Kendrick declared, not as a guest, not as a charity case. You're staying because this house has 6 empty bedrooms and one of them should have someone in it who actually deserves to be comfortable. That's not a discussion. That's a fact. Jaime stared at him. His eyes glistened, but nothing fell. He wrote one word. Why? Because Henry asked you if he was safe and you said yes. And you were right. Kendrick took a sip of coffee. That's enough reason. Dennis met Jaime later that same morning. Dennis was the middle triplet, the strategist, the one who spoke least and noticed most. He ran the analytical side of the Moretti operations, patterns, systems, the invisible architecture that held their empire together. He communicated in data. He trusted numbers the way other people trusted intuition. He walked into the living room at 8 a.m. and found Jaime sitting on the couch with a borrowed blanket over his lap, sketching again. This time it was the view from the window, the garden, the oak tree, the iron fence that bordered the property. Dennis stood in the doorway and watched. Jaime's hand moved with certainty, each line intentional. No erasing, no second-guessing. The drawing grew from the center outward, the way a spider builds a web, structure first, detail later. You're left-handed, Dennis observed. Jaime looked up, nodded. And you draw from memory or observation? Jaime tilted his hand back and forth, a gesture that meant both. Dennis sat down in the armchair across from him. I'm Dennis, the middle one. Henry probably didn't mention me. He forgets I exist until he needs someone to balance a ledger. Jaime's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He wrote, he talked about you in the car. He mentioned you like puzzles. I don't like puzzles. I like systems. Puzzles have one solution. Systems have thousands. You just have to find the one that doesn't collapse. Jaime considered this, then wrote, people are systems too, right? Dennis looked at him, really looked, with the same focus he applied to spreadsheets and probability models, and recognized something unusual. Intelligence. Not the loud, performing kind. The quiet kind. The kind that watched and absorbed and connected dots that other people didn't even know existed. Yeah, Dennis replied. People are systems too. Complicated ones. The complicated ones are the most interesting. Dennis allowed himself a small, rare smile. You might be right about that. Within 3 days, Jaime had become part of the household's rhythm. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures or emotional declarations. Quietly, naturally. The way a river finds the path of least resistance and carves its own channel without anyone telling it where to go. He woke early and drew. He helped in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with meticulous precision, loading the dishwasher without being asked, leaving the counters cleaner than he found them. He read books from the library, 2 a day sometimes, sitting in a patch of sunlight on the floor with his bad legs stretched out in front of him and his crutches laid neatly to one side. He communicated through his notepad, and the triplets learned to read his handwriting as fluently as any spoken language. Henry carried on entire conversations with him in the garden. Kendrick discussed art and architecture with him over morning coffee. Dennis brought him data visualization books and watched, fascinated, as Jaime translated the concepts into drawings that made more sense than any chart Dennis had ever built. Jaime asked for nothing. Not clothes, not money, not attention. When the triplets gave him things, a new sketchbook, a proper set of drawing pencils, a brace for his leg that actually fit, his eyes went wide and wet, and he wrote thank you in letters so careful they looked like calligraphy, and the gratitude in those 2 words was so earnest that it hurt to receive. He was good. Purely, stubbornly, completely good, and in a household built on power and strategy and the controlled application of intimidation, his goodness was so foreign it was almost blinding. And then Atus came home. Atus Crane had married the Moretti triplets 2 years ago. It was a strategic union. The Crane family controlled shipping along the eastern seaboard, and the Morettis needed access to their ports. Love existed, or something shaped like it. Familiarity, attraction, the comfortable shorthand that develops between people who share a bed and a bank account. But Atus was, at his core, a man who understood the world through hierarchy. Value was determined by usefulness. People were assets, liabilities, or irrelevant, and he sorted them into those categories with the efficiency of a machine. He had been away on business for 10 days. He walked through the front door at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, set his bag in the hallway, and found a stranger sitting at his kitchen table. Jaime looked up from his sketchbook. He offered a small wave, tentative, polite. Atus looked at the crutches leaning against the table, looked at the brace on Jaime's leg, looked at the notepad, the pencils, the borrowed clothes that clearly belonged to Henry based on the size. Who is this? Atus directed the question at Kendrick, who stood at the stove. Jaime Wilder. He's living with us. Since when? Since 10 days ago. Atus studied Jaime the way a man studies an invoice, looking for the number at the bottom, the cost, the return on investment. He found nothing that satisfied him. He can't walk properly, Atus observed, as if Jaime were not sitting 3 feet away. And he can't talk? Jaime's pen did not move. He sat very still, his gaze fixed on the table. He communicates through writing, Dennis corrected from the doorway. And his mobility is limited, not absent. Both of which are irrelevant to why he's here. Why is he here, then? Because we want him here, Henry answered, stepping into the kitchen from the hallway. That's all the reason there needs to be. Atus smiled. It was the kind of smile that made negotiations go sideways. Charming on the surface, calculating underneath. Sure, Atus agreed. Whatever you want. Your house, your rules. And for exactly 48 hours, everything appeared fine. But now, if this story is keeping your attention, do us a quick favor. Tap that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust us, you won't want to miss what happens next. The first incident happened on a Thursday morning. Jaime was in the hallway, making his way toward the kitchen on his crutches, when Atus came around the corner. They nearly collided. Atus sidestepped easily. Jaime stumbled. His crutch caught the edge of the hallway runner, and for one terrible moment he teetered off balance, his bad leg buckling. Atus watched him struggle, did not extend a hand, did not step forward, just watched with an expression that was not cruel exactly, but vacant. The way you watch a mechanical problem that doesn't concern you. Jaime caught himself on the wall, righted his crutches, continued toward the kitchen without looking back. Henry, who had been coming down the stairs, saw the whole thing. He didn't say anything. Not yet. But that night, lying awake in the bed he shared with his brothers and their husband, Henry stared at the ceiling and replayed the moment. Atrus's still hands, his empty eyes, the 3 seconds of watching that cost nothing to fill with basic human decency and yet remained unfilled. The second incident happened on Saturday. The triplets were in a meeting, the kind that happened in the study with the door locked and the phone silenced. Jaime was alone with Atus for the first time. When the triplets emerged 2 hours later, they found Jaime in the guest room. He was sitting on the bed, sketchbook closed, hands folded in his lap. His face was composed. Still, that careful blankness they had seen on the first night, the one that meant he was protecting himself. Henry sat beside him. "Hey, you okay?" Jaime picked up his pen. Wrote, "I'm fine." "Jaime." A pause. "Then your husband explained some things to me. About my place in this house. He was polite about it. It's okay. He's right." Henry felt his stomach drop. "What did he say?" "That I should be grateful. That people like me don't get chances like this. That I shouldn't get comfortable because nothing is permanent." A pause. "That I should stop drawing at the kitchen table because it makes the house look like a daycare." Henry read the notepad. Read it again. Felt a heat build behind his eyes that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with grief. Grief for every person who had ever told Jaime to shrink, to make himself less visible, to apologize for occupying space. "That's not true," Henry informed him. "None of that is true. It's okay. I've heard worse." And that sentence, "I've heard worse," delivered without bitterness, without self-pity, as plain and factual as a weather report, landed in Henry's chest like a stone in still water and sent ripples outward that would not stop for a very long time. Henry told his brothers that night. The 3 of them stood in the study, voices low, the door closed. Atus had already gone to bed. "He didn't threaten him," Henry reported. "Didn't touch him. Didn't raise his voice. He just told a kid who has never had a home that he doesn't deserve one." To his face. While we weren't in the room. Dennis's jaw worked. He pulled up the house's internal camera system on his laptop. The one Atus didn't know about. Because Dennis had installed it himself 3 months ago for security purposes, and found the footage from the living room. They watched it together. Atus, sitting in the armchair, Jaime on the couch. Atus talking casually, almost kindly, the way you explain a simple concept to a child who doesn't understand. Jaime listening, writing responses that Atus didn't bother to read. Atus checking his phone mid-conversation. Atus laughing once, briefly, at something on his screen, completely ignoring the young man across from him mid-sentence. Then the part Henry had described. The careful dismantling. The words delivered not with malice but with something worse. Indifference. The tone of a man who genuinely believed he was being reasonable. That a voiceless, limping orphan should understand his position in the hierarchy and be grateful for whatever scraps drifted his way. The footage ended. The study was very quiet. "Play it again," Kendrick instructed. Dennis did. Kendrick watched the whole thing a second time. His expression didn't change. His posture didn't shift. But his eyes, dark, steady, inherited from a mother who could silence a room by entering it. His eyes went cold in a way his brothers recognized. That was Kendrick's anger. Not loud, not hot, not explosive. Cold. Calculated. The kind that built cases and dismantled lives with the patience of a glacier. "This isn't who I married," Kendrick announced. "Or maybe it is, and I didn't want to see it." "What do we do?" Henry asked. "We watch. We listen. We give him one more chance to be a decent person." Kendrick paused. "And if he can't manage that, if he can't treat a kid with a broken leg and no voice with basic respect, then we know everything we need to know. Not about Jaime. About us. About what we're willing to accept." 7 days whistled by. 7 days of the triplets watching, waiting, cataloging. Not with suspicion, with the careful attention of men who had built an empire by noticing what others missed. Jaime, unaware of the scrutiny, continued to exist in his quiet, careful way. He drew. He helped around the house. He sat with Dennis in the evenings and learned data mapping, translating numbers into visual stories with a talent that made Dennis's analytical mind spark with recognition. He gardened with Henry, working the soil with his hands while his crutches lay in the grass nearby. His bad leg folded beneath him, dirt under his fingernails, a look of concentration on his face that bordered on peace. He and Kendrick developed a morning routine, coffee, drawing, silence that felt like a conversation. And Atus for 7 days was perfectly pleasant. He greeted Jaime at meals. made surface-level small talk that Jaime answered with polite nods and brief notepad responses. He didn't repeat his earlier comments. He was cordial, distant, civil. The way you are with a neighbor's dog you don't particularly like but would never kick. On the 5th day, Henry allowed himself to hope. On the 6th day, Dennis cautioned him not to. On the 7th day, they found out why. It started with the sketchbook. Jaime's sketchbook. The one Kendrick had bought him, leather-bound, thick pages, artist-grade paper, was his most important possession. Not because of its material value, but because of what lived inside it. Weeks of drawings. The fruit bowl. The oak tree. The kitchen window. Kendrick's profile while reading. Dennis's hands on a keyboard. Henry laughing in the garden with soil on his cheek. And newer drawings too. Ones he hadn't shown anyone. The three brothers at the dinner table, rendered in such detail that you could tell them apart by posture alone. Kendrick's straight-backed authority. Dennis's contained focus. Henry's easy lean. He kept the sketchbook on the nightstand in his room. Always. It was the first thing he reached for in the morning and the last thing he touched at night. On the 7th day it was gone. Jaime searched his room. Then the hallway. Then the kitchen, the living room, the library. He moved through the house on his crutches with a speed that made his bad leg ache, checking every surface, every shelf, every place he might have absent-mindedly set it down. Nothing. He found Henry in the garden and held up his notepad. His handwriting, usually precise, was shaky. My sketchbook is gone. I can't find it anywhere. I'm sorry, I know it was expensive. I'll replace it somehow. I'm sorry. Jaime, slow down. Henry set his gardening gloves aside. When did you last have it? Last night. On my nightstand. It was there when I turned off the light. Then it's in the house. We'll find it. They searched together. Henry recruited Kendrick and Dennis, and the four of them combed through every room, every drawer, every closet, every space where a leather-bound book could conceivably hide. It was Dennis who found it. In the recycling bin. In the garage. Tucked beneath a stack of flattened cardboard boxes, as though someone had wanted it buried but not technically destroyed. A deniable middle ground between malice and indifference. Dennis brought it inside. The cover was bent. Several pages were creased. The drawing of the three brothers at the dinner table had a long, diagonal scratch across it, the kind made by a fingernail, deliberate and precise. Jaime took the sketchbook in both hands. He opened it to the damaged page, and for several seconds he didn't move, didn't write, didn't react. He just held it and looked at the scratch running through the faces of the three people who had shown him kindness. Then he closed the book, tucked it under his arm, and wrote a single line. It's okay. I can redraw it. He went to his room, closed the door, and the sound of that door closing, quiet, controlled, without a trace of anger or self-pity, was louder than any scream. The triplets stood in the hallway. The cameras, Dennis spoke. They went to the study. Dennis pulled the footage. 2:47 a.m. Atus, in the hallway outside Jaime's room, opening the door with the slow caution of someone who knew what he was doing. Entering. Emerging 12 seconds later with the sketchbook. Walking to the garage. Placing it in the recycling bin. Covering it with cardboard. Returning to bed. 12 seconds. That's all it took to steal the only thing a person with nothing had that mattered. Kendrick watched the footage 3 times. The 3rd time, he paused it on Atrus's face. The expression he wore while carrying the sketchbook through the hallway. Not anger. Not jealousy. Not even cruelty, exactly. Satisfaction. The quiet, private satisfaction of a man who had rearranged the world to match his idea of how it should look. A man who saw a voiceless, limping young artist being loved by his husbands and decided, calmly, rationally, in the middle of the night, that this was an imbalance that needed correcting. That's enough, Kendrick concluded. More than enough, Dennis agreed. Henry didn't speak. He was looking at the study wall, at a small drawing Jaime had given them 3 days ago. The oak tree in the garden, rendered in pencil, taped to the wall beside a painting worth more than most people's cars. It was better than the painting. Not technically, the painting was a masterwork by a celebrated artist. But the drawing had something the painting didn't. Tension. Real attention. The kind that only comes from someone who has spent a lifetime watching the world from the outside and has learned to see it with a precision that belonging would have dulled. I want him gone, Henry declared. Not about Jaime. About Atus. Not gone, Kendrick corrected. Divorced. Properly. Legally. Completely. He'll fight it, Dennis pointed out. The business implications alone. Let him fight. Kendrick's voice was even, his posture unchanged, his hands perfectly still. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what we lose. A man who steals art from a mute kid in the middle of the night is not a man I share a name with. They called their lawyer at 6 a.m. The papers were drafted by noon. Notarized by 3 p.m. On the kitchen table by 7:14 the following morning. Which brings us back to where we started. Atus sat at the table with the divorce papers in his hands, and his face cycled through expressions like a slot machine. Disbelief, calculation, anger, charm, back to calculation. Let's be reasonable, he began. We are being reasonable, Kendrick returned. Reasonable is a document. Unreasonable is what I want to do, which is put your belongings on the front lawn and change the locks before lunch. Over a sketchbook? Over some homeless kid who... Finish that sentence. Henry's voice was low, almost gentle, which made it more dangerous. I'm asking you to finish it. Tell us what he is. Say it out loud. Atrus's mouth opened. Closed. That's what I thought. Henry stepped back. You can't even say it when we're watching. You can only do it at 2 a.m., in the dark, when nobody's there to see. Atus turned to Dennis, the quiet one, the logical one, the brother most likely to see the strategic cost of this decision. Dennis, think about what this does to the business. The shipping contracts, the port access, you'd throw all that away. Dennis tilted his head. I already ran the numbers. We lose the crane shipping routes. That's approximately 18% of our logistics capacity. It'll take 7 to 9 months to rebuild through alternative channels. I built the transition plan last night. It's thorough. He paused. Would you like to see the spreadsheet? Atrus's expression finally cracked. Not into anger, into something smaller, meaner, more honest. This is about him. That Omega. You're choosing him over me. No, Kendrick corrected. We're choosing ourselves over you. The version of ourselves that exists when you're not in the room. The version that gives a kid a home and a cup of coffee and a place to draw. That's the version we want to be. And you make that version impossible. So yes, Henry added. In a way, this is about Jaime. But not because we're choosing him. Because he showed us who you are. And who you are is not someone we can love anymore. The room held still. Atus looked at the papers. Looked at his husbands, soon-to-be former husbands. Looked at the kitchen where, 10 days ago, a young man with a broken leg and no voice had tasted coffee for the first time and smiled like the world had given him a gift he didn't know existed. Fine. Atus picked up the pen. Signed. The sound of the pen on paper was very small and very final. But this isn't over. I know things about your operations that are all documented, anticipated, and legally protected. Dennis cut in. I've been the family strategist for 12 years. Atus. Did you really think I didn't have contingencies? Atus set the pen down. Stood. Looked at them one last time with an expression that wanted to be dignified but landed somewhere closer to confused. The confusion of a man who had always believed that power and value were the same thing, and had just been proven wrong by 3 men who chose a stranger's sketchbook over an empire's convenience. He walked out. The front door opened and closed. And the Moretti household, lighter by one husband, heavier by one truth, stood in the kitchen and breathed. Jaime didn't know about the divorce. Not immediately. He spent the morning in his room, carefully redrawing the damaged page. The 3 brothers at the dinner table, recreated from memory with the patient precision of someone who understood that beautiful things could be destroyed and rebuilt and that the rebuilding was its own kind of art. At noon, Henry knocked. Can I come in? The door opened. Jaime stood on one crutch, the other leaning against the bed. He looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Henry sat on the edge of the bed. Atus is gone. Jaime's eyebrows rose. He reached for his notepad. On a trip? Permanently. Henry paused. Choosing words felt important. We ended the marriage. This morning. He signed the papers and left. Jaime stared at him, then wrote very slowly. Because of the sketchbook? Because of what the sketchbook represented. Because of how he treated you. Because... Henry ran a hand through his hair. Because a person's worth isn't determined by whether they can walk straight or speak out loud. And if our husband couldn't understand that, then we couldn't share a life with him. It's that simple. Jamie's hand trembled over the notepad. He wrote and crossed out 3 different responses before settling on one. You shouldn't have done that for me. I'm not worth a marriage. Henry took the notepad from his hands. Gently, carefully, the way you handle something precious. He turned to a blank page and wrote in his own handwriting, larger, blunter, less elegant than Jamie's. You are worth everything we did and more. Don't argue with me. He handed the notepad back. Jaime read it. His eyes filled. He blinked, and 2 tears tracked down his cheeks. The first tears any of the brothers had ever seen him shed. Not because he was weak. Because he was being told something that contradicted 22 years of evidence. And the contradiction was so enormous that his body didn't know how to hold it except to overflow. Henry sat with him, not touching, not speaking, just present. And Jaime cried silently, the way he did everything, without sound, without spectacle, with a dignity that made the moment sacred. The weeks that followed Atrus's departure were strange and tender. The house felt different without him. Not empty. Emptiness implies something missing. It felt cleared, the way a room feels after you open the windows and let the stale air out. There was a lightness to the hallways, a quiet that was companionable rather than tense. Jaime noticed it too. He began to move through the house differently, not with the careful, apologetic caution of a guest, but with the growing comfort of someone who was starting to believe he might be allowed to stay. He left his sketchbook on the kitchen table, drew there openly, freely, without glancing over his shoulder. He began leaving small drawings around the house, a robin on a branch, taped to the fridge, a detailed study of Kendrick's reading glasses, left on his desk, a tiny, perfect rendering of Henry's gardening gloves, tucked into the tool drawer in the garage. They were gifts, wordless and signed gifts from someone who had nothing else to give and was finding out, day by day, that giving was its own form of speaking. Kendrick collected them. He bought a large corkboard, hung it in the hallway, and pinned each drawing in place. When Jaime saw it, 27 small drawings, displayed like a gallery exhibit. He stood in front of it for a long time, one hand on his crutch, the other hanging at his side, and his face did something complicated that ended in a smile so wide it transformed his entire appearance. He wrote in his notepad, "Nobody ever kept them before." "Then nobody was paying attention," Kendrick replied. And here's where the story shifts. Because for all the warmth and all the healing and all the small, quiet moments of connection building in the Moretti household, none of the brothers knew the most important thing about Jaime Wilder. They knew he was an orphan. They knew he was mute. They knew he was injured and talented and kind, and that his eyes were the color of rain-washed pennies. They did not know who he actually was. And they were about to find out. Started with a phone call. Not to the Moretti house, to Dennis's secure line, the one used exclusively for business intelligence. The caller was a contact inside the federal system. A clerk who owed Dennis a favor large enough to buy silence and small enough to spend on curiosity. "You asked me to run a background check on a Jaime Wilder," the contact reported. "Born May 3rd, foster system, the whole package you described. And it's clean. Too clean. The kind of clean that happens when someone has professionally scrubbed a record." Dennis's pen stopped mid-notation. "Explain." "The foster records exist, but they're shallow. Names and dates, no case notes. The medical history shows the leg injury but no follow-up documentation. No school transcripts after age 14, which is impossible, the state requires them. And his birth certificate." The contact paused. "It's a reissue. The original was sealed by court order when he was 3 years old." "Sealed by whom?" "Judge Patricia Langston, retired now. She handled one very specific type of case during her tenure." "Which type?" "Witness protection placements for minors." Dennis set the pen down. He told his brothers that evening, after Jaime had gone to bed. The 3 of them sat in the study, the door locked, the lights low. "Witness protection," Henry repeated. Jaime was in witness protection? From age 3? Possibly. The sealed birth certificate suggests it. A reissued certificate with no original accessible. That's a hallmark of identity reconstruction for protected witnesses. "Witness to what?" Kendrick asked. "He was 3. That's what I need to find out. But whatever it was significant enough for a federal judge to seal his records permanently. And someone, at some point, scrubbed his background clean enough that a standard check returns nothing unusual. That takes resources. Government resources." Kendrick leaned back. His mind was already running scenarios, probabilities, threat assessments. Does anyone know he's here? Unknown. If the protection was active, his location would be monitored. If it lapsed, which happens when kids age out of foster care and the system loses track of them, then he's essentially invisible. No permanent address, no employment record, no digital footprint. He's a ghost. He's not a ghost, Henry corrected quietly. He's a person who was hidden so well that even he might not know who he is. That landed with weight. We need to find out, Kendrick decided, carefully, without putting him at risk. Dennis, dig deeper, but gently. If someone was protecting him, I want to know why. And if someone is looking for him, I want to know that too. Dennis worked for 4 days. He was methodical, patient, forensic. He traced the sealed birth certificate through 3 jurisdictions. He found Judge Langston's retirement community in Vermont and sent a carefully worded letter requesting a conversation. He cross-referenced Jaime's approximate timeline, the gaps in his record, the foster placements, the geographic pattern of his moves, against federal witness protection databases that he technically should not have been able to access but did, because Dennis Moretti had a talent for finding doors that other people didn't know existed. On the 4th day, Judge Langston called him back. She was 81 years old, sharp as a scalpel, and immediately suspicious. Who are you, and why are you asking about sealed records from 20 years ago? Dennis considered several approaches, charm, authority, deception, and chose the only one that felt right. My name is Dennis Moretti. Jaime Wilder is living in my home. Care about him. I want to understand his history so I can protect him properly. I'm not interested in reopening anything legal. I just need to know if he's safe. A long silence. Then, Moretti. I know that name. You're one of the triplets. Yes, ma'am. Your family's reputation precedes you. I'm aware. Another silence, longer this time. Then Judge Langston sighed. A sound heavy with decades and decisions and the particular exhaustion of someone who had spent a career making impossible choices about vulnerable children. Jaime Wilder is not his real name, she told him. His birth name is Jaime Renner. Dennis's hand tightened on the phone. Renner. The Renner family. The name that had dominated federal headlines 19 years ago. A sprawling criminal dynasty that had controlled narcotics distribution across 6 states until an internal informant brought the entire operation down. Arrests, trials, convictions, the biggest takedown of organized crime in a decade. The informant had been Jaime's father, Marcus Renner, the patriarch's own brother. He had turned state's witness, testified against the family, and in return, received new identities for himself, his wife, and his 3-year-old son. The parents didn't make it, Judge Langston continued, her voice careful. Car accident 2 years after relocation. The boy was 5. Officially, it was an accident. The federal assessment was inconclusive. You think they were found. I think that a family with the resources of the Renners doesn't forget betrayal. And I think that a 5-year-old boy who survived what his parents didn't was placed into the foster system under a sealed identity and forgotten by the people who should have been watching him. The witness protection. It was supposed to continue after the parents died? It was supposed to, but the case agent retired. The file was transferred. Budgets were cut. A child without a voice and with a sealed identity in an overcrowded foster system. He became invisible. Not intentionally, just structurally. The system wasn't built to hold onto someone that small. Dennis closed his eyes. Is anyone still looking for him? The elder Renners, the ones who were convicted, most are dead or still in prison. But there's one. Dominic Renner. He was released on appeal 14 months ago. Insufficient evidence on 3 of the 4 charges. He served 15 years. And from what I understand, she paused. He has been asking questions. About loose ends. Jaime doesn't know any of this. He was 3 when it happened. He doesn't remember his parents. Doesn't know his real name. Doesn't know that the reason his life has been so hard is because a government that promised to protect him simply stopped. Dennis opened his eyes. Thank you, Judge. Mr. Moretti. Keep that boy safe. The system failed him. Don't you fail him too? The study that night felt different. Dennis laid out everything, the timeline, the family connections, the sealed records, the released uncle. He spoke for 20 minutes without interruption. His voice precise and controlled. His data organized into a narrative that built toward a conclusion none of them wanted to reach. Dominic Renner was out. Dominic Renner was looking. And Jaime. There Jaime, who drew pictures of oak trees and had never tasted coffee before last month, and cried silently when someone told him he was worth something, was the son of the man who had destroyed Dominic's empire and his life. He doesn't know, Henry confirmed. He has no idea. His memories start in foster care. Everything before that is gone, whether by trauma, by age, or by design. Do we tell him? Kendrick asked. The question hung in the room. Not yet, Dennis answered. Not until we understand the threat level. If Dominic is actively searching, telling Jaime now could put him in more danger. He might panic, might run, might do something visible that makes him easier to find. For now, we increase security. Quietly, without alarming him. And if Dominic finds him before we're ready? Dennis met Kendrick's eyes. Then Dominic Renner meets the Moretti family. And he discovers that the scariest thing in this country isn't a crime dynasty with a grudge. It's 3 brothers who made a promise. They increased security the next day. Subtly. The kind of security that doesn't look like security. A new landscaping crew that happened to include 2 men trained in personal protection. An updated alarm system that Dennis described as routine maintenance. A second vehicle in the driveway that wasn't there for decoration. Jaime noticed the changes. Of course he did. He noticed everything. It was the superpower that came with a lifetime of watching. He wrote in his notepad one morning over coffee. Something is different. You're worried about something. You don't have to tell me what it is. But if I can help, I want to. Kendrick read the note and something inside him ached. The specific ache of caring for someone who offered help before asking for it. Who noticed your burden before announcing his own. We're just being careful, Kendrick answered. It's what we do. Is it about me? It's about keeping everyone in this house safe. You included. Jaime studied him. His penny-colored eyes were clear, perceptive, unsettlingly direct. Then he wrote, You're lying. But it's the kind of lying people do when they're protecting someone, so I'll allow it. For now. Kendrick, who had faced down prosecutors, competitors, and men with far more power than sense, felt genuinely seen for the first time in years. Seen by a 22-year-old who couldn't speak, who had to write his observations by hand, who processed the world through watching and translating and drawing, and who, despite everything, still chose to trust. For now, Kendrick agreed. Okay, friends, a quick reminder. If you're glued to this story the way we think you are, subscribing takes 1 second and guarantees you never miss a story like this one. 3 weeks after the divorce, the household had settled into a new rhythm. Mornings belonged to Kendrick and Jaime. Coffee, drawing, the companionable silence of 2 people who communicated best without words. Kendrick would read at the table while Jaime sketched, and occasionally Jaime would slide a drawing across the table for Kendrick's inspection. A character study of the mail carrier, a detailed rendering of the coffee machine, a miniature landscape of the garden viewed through the kitchen window. Kendrick's responses were always honest. The perspective on this one is off. The vanishing point is too high. Or, this is the best thing you've drawn. Frame it. He treated Jaime's art as legitimate, worthy of real critique, and that respect. Not the compliments but the willingness to criticize, to take the work seriously, made Jaime produce better and better work with each passing day. Afternoons belonged to Dennis and Jaime. They worked together in the study, Dennis on his business analytics, Jaime on increasingly sophisticated data visualizations that Dennis had started assigning him as exercises. Bar charts became infographics. Infographics became complex system maps. Jaime absorbed information the way desert soil absorbs rain. Totally, gratefully, transformatively. One afternoon, Dennis showed Jaime a dataset from the family's legitimate business operations. A logistics puzzle that had been giving his team problems for weeks. Turn this into a picture, Dennis instructed. Show me what you see. Jaime worked for 2 hours. When he finished, he handed Dennis a hand-drawn diagram that mapped the entire supply chain as a network of interconnected circles, with bottlenecks highlighted in red and alternative pathways drawn in green. Dennis looked at it for a long time. You found the problem, Dennis stated. Jaime tilted his head. Wrote. It's the 3rd distribution point. It's carrying twice the load of the others because the routing algorithm treats it as a shortcut. But it's actually adding 2 days to the eastern deliveries. Dennis stared at the diagram. Then at Jaime. I have a team of 7 analysts. They've been looking at this for 3 weeks. They're looking at numbers. Numbers don't always show shapes. Shapes show bottlenecks. Dennis made a sound that might have been a laugh. You're hired. I don't have a resume. You have something better. You have a way of seeing that I can't teach. Everything else I can. Evenings belonged to Henry and Jaime. They spent them in the garden, the one part of the property where Jaime seemed fully at ease, where the tension in his shoulders dropped and his face opened up and he looked, for moments at a time, like someone who had never been hurt. Henry taught him about plants the way his own mother had taught him, through touch and attention and the slow, accumulating patience of growing things. They planted a row of tomatoes along the south wall. They built a raised bed for herbs. They composted, weeded, watered, and stood together in the fading light watching the garden become something it hadn't been before. Tended, cared for, loved. One evening, Jaime set down his trowel and wrote, "Can I ask you something personal? Always. Why did you marry Atus?" Henry considered the question. It deserved honesty. Because I thought that love meant finding someone who matched our world. Someone who understood the business, the power, the way we lived. Atus fit. He was smart, he was connected, he knew the rules. But fitting isn't the same as belonging. He fit the way a key fits a lock, mechanically, functionally. It worked. It just didn't matter. Henry paused. I wanted someone who made the world bigger, not just more efficient. Someone who showed me things I hadn't seen before. Jaime looked at him, then at the garden, the tomatoes they had planted together, the herbs coming up through dark soil, the evidence of care and time and attention. He wrote, like a garden. Yeah. Henry's voice was rough at the edges. Exactly like a garden. Jaime held the notepad in his lap, pen hovering. Then he wrote one more thing. Slowly, each letter formed with the same care he gave his drawings. I think you deserved better. All three of you. You deserve someone who sees you, not what you own or what you control, but you. The person who sits in the dirt and talks to tomato plants. That person is worth seeing. Henry read it twice, and felt, with a certainty that bypassed logic entirely, that this quiet young man with the damaged leg and the absent voice and the penny-colored eyes understood him more completely than anyone he had ever married. But love, or whatever was building in the spaces between words and drawings and shared silences, would have to wait. Because Dominic Renner was getting closer. And he was not alone. Dennis's network operated on information the way most systems operate on electricity. It was the essential current, the thing that made everything else possible. So when his contact in the federal system called at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday with a single-sentence update, the current surged. Dominic Renner hired a private investigator. Former FBI. Name's Carson Wells. He's good. Dennis was at his desk, 3 monitors active, coffee long gone cold. How good? Good enough to track a sealed identity if he gets a starting thread. And Renner gave him one, the last known foster placement before the kid aged out. A group home in Trenton. Wells visited it last week. Dennis's fingers were already moving across the keyboard. The group home. What records do they keep? Standard discharge paperwork. Name, date, forwarding address if there is one. For Jaime, there wouldn't be a forwarding address, but there would be a physical description, approximate age, and any identifying medical information. Like a leg brace. Like a leg brace. Dennis hung up, pulled the security feeds, checked the perimeter systems, drafted a protocol update for the household protection team, then went to find his brothers. The conversation in the study was tense and focused. Timeline, Kendrick demanded. If Wells started at the group home last week, he has Jaime's discharge description. Physical details, approximate location. From there, he'll canvass shelters, hospitals, anywhere a young man with a leg brace might have been documented. It's a wide search, but Wells is methodical. I'd estimate 4 to 6 weeks before he narrows it down to our area. Can we misdirect? Already working on it. I've seeded 3 alternative trails. False sightings, fabricated shelter records, a digital footprint pointing toward Portland. It'll buy time, but it won't stop Wells permanently. He'll eventually eliminate the false leads. Henry spoke from the corner where he'd been listening. What does Dominic want? Revenge, Dennis answered simply. Jaime's father destroyed the Renner empire. Dominic spent 15 years in prison because of Marcus Renner's testimony. Jaime is Marcus's son, the last living piece of the man who ruined Dominic's life. Jaime didn't do anything. He doesn't have to. For Dominic, Jaime's existence is the offense. He's a reminder, a loose end, a symbol of everything Dominic lost. Then we end it, Kendrick declared. Not defensively. Not by hiding. We end Dominic Renner's ability to threaten Jaime. Permanently and legally. How? Kendrick's expression was the one his brothers knew best. The strategic calm that preceded his most devastating moves. Dominic was released on appeal because of insufficient evidence. That means the original case had gaps. Dennis, I need you to find those gaps. Not to fill them, but to find what fell through them. If Dominic has been active since his release, he's left traces. Business contacts, financial movements, communication patterns. Build me a file. For what? For a conversation with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We have something they want, intelligence on an active threat from a released federal prisoner. They have something we want, the legal authority to make that threat disappear. Dennis nodded slowly. You want to trade. I want to protect our family. If that means giving the federal government a gift-wrapped case against Dominic Renner, then yes, I want to trade. While the brothers strategized, Jaime continued to exist in his quiet, expanding world. He didn't know about Dominic. Didn't know about Carson Wells. Didn't know that the three men who had given him a home were now building a fortress around him with the same determination they applied to every operation they undertook. Total commitment, zero compromise. But he knew something was happening. He was too perceptive not to notice. The new landscaping crew that patrolled the property with military precision. The way Dennis checked his phone every hour with an intensity that went beyond business. The occasional tension in Kendrick's posture. A rigidity that appeared and disappeared so quickly most people would miss it. But Jaime didn't miss things like that. Jaime noticed everything. He expressed his observation the only way he could. He drew it. One morning, Kendrick came downstairs to find a new drawing on the corkboard in the hallway. It showed three figures standing shoulder to shoulder, facing outward, backs to the viewer, faces toward something unseen beyond the frame. Their postures were protective, alert, ready. Behind them, partially hidden by their combined silhouettes, was a smaller figure. Sitting, drawing. Kendrick stood in front of it for a long time. Jaime appeared at the end of the hallway on his crutches, heading for the kitchen. He stopped when he saw Kendrick at the corkboard. Kendrick turned. You know. Jaime didn't pretend to misunderstand. He walked over and wrote, I don't know what, but I know you're protecting me from something. And I know it scares you, even though you'd never admit it. I'm not scared. Your shoulders go up a quarter inch when you're worried. Dennis's typing speed increases. Henry overseers the garden. He pruned the same rosebush 3 times yesterday. Kendrick almost laughed. You're too observant for your own good. It's the only skill I've had my whole life. Watching. Reading people. Figuring out who's dangerous and who's safe. He paused, then wrote, You're safe. Whatever is happening. I trust you. All 3 of you. I just want you to know that. Jaime. And if whatever you're protecting me from is about who I am, about something in my past that I don't remember, then I'd rather hear it from you than find out some other way. Whenever you're ready. No rush. Kendrick looked at the drawing on the corkboard. The 3 figures. The hidden fourth. Tonight, he decided. After dinner, we'll tell you everything. Dinner was roasted chicken with herbs from the garden. Herbs that Jaime and Henry had planted together. The irony was not lost on anyone. Afterward, the 4 of them sat in the living room. The lighting was warm but not dim. Kendrick wanted clarity, not atmosphere. Your name, Kendrick began, isn't Jaime Wilder. Jaime's pen paused over his notepad. He looked up. Your name, your original name, is Jaime Renner. You were born into a family that ran one of the largest criminal operations on the East Coast. When you were 3, your father testified against his own family and brought the entire organization down. You and your parents were placed in witness protection. New names, new location, new life. Jaime sat perfectly still, not blank, processing. His eyes moved as if reading invisible text. Your parents died when you were 5. The government called it an accident. We believe it wasn't. Kendrick's voice remained steady, factual, controlled. After that, you were placed in foster care under your new identity. The witness protection that was supposed to follow you through the system fell apart. Budget cuts, personnel changes, institutional failure. You were lost. Jaime's pen touched the notepad, lifted, touched again. He wrote, Lost? Not physically, administratively. The people who were supposed to keep track of you, to make sure you were safe, to ensure the new identity held, they moved on. You became a file in a cabinet that nobody opened. The room was quiet. Henry sat close enough to Jaime to reach out, but didn't. This was not a moment for comfort. This was a moment for truth. There's more, Dennis continued. One of the men your father testified against, Dominic Renner, your uncle, was released from prison 14 months ago. He's been looking for you. He hired someone to track you down. Jaime wrote. His handwriting was steady, remarkably so, for someone receiving this information. Why? Because your father destroyed his world. And you're your father's son. I don't remember any of this. I don't remember my parents. I don't remember being anyone other than Jaime Wilder. We know, Kendrick said gently. That's why we didn't tell you immediately. We wanted to understand the situation first. To have a plan. Do you have one? Yes. We're building a federal case against Dominic using his activities since release. When it's ready, we'll deliver it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. In exchange, they'll reactivate your protection status and ensure Dominic can't reach you. Jaime looked at Kendrick, then Dennis, then Henry. His eyes were wet but focused, the clarity of someone who had spent a lifetime absorbing bad news and had developed the emotional architecture to hold it without collapsing. He wrote, "You could have just sent me away. That would have been easier. Safer for you." "Nothing about sending you away would be easier," Henry answered, and his voice cracked on the last word despite his best effort. "Your business, your safety, your lives. You're risking all of it. For someone who isn't even using his real name." "Names are just sounds," Kendrick replied. "The person sitting in front of us, the one who draws and gardens and solves logistics problems that stump professional analysts, that person is real regardless of what we call him." Jaime looked down at his notepad. He wrote slowly, deliberately, each word placed with the precision of his drawings. "My whole life I thought I was nobody, just some kid the system forgot. I thought the reason nobody came back for me was because there was nobody to come back. I thought I was alone because I was unimportant, not worth remembering." He turned to a new page. "But that's not true, is it? I wasn't forgotten because I was unimportant. I was hidden. Somebody, my father, did something brave. And the cost of that bravery was everything. His life. My mother's life. My name. My voice, maybe. Everything." Another page. "And now 3 people I've known for less than 2 months are willing to fight for me. Not because of who I was born as. Not because of my father or my family name. Just because I drew some pictures and planted some tomatoes and existed. In your house. In your lives." He set the pen down. Looked at the 3 of them. And for the first time, the very first time since Henry had found him on that bench outside the grocery store, Jaime Wilder opened his mouth. And a sound came out. Not a word exactly. Not speech. A breath that had shape to it. A vibration in his throat that wanted to be language but hadn't remembered how. His eyes went wide. His hand flew to his throat. Henry was beside him in an instant. "Jaime." Jaime tried again. His lips formed around a syllable. His vocal cords, dormant for 14 years, paralyzed by trauma, silenced by a nervous system that had decided long ago that sound was dangerous, shuddered. "Th." A gasp. A break. A trembling. "Thank." One word. Incomplete, ragged, barely audible, but real. A sound made by a human voice that had chosen, after 14 years of silence, to try. Jaime's hand covered his mouth. Tears ran down his face. He grabbed the notepad and wrote with shaking hands. "I didn't know I could still do that." "You can," Henry whispered, and he was crying too, which he hadn't done since he was 12. "You can. Whenever you're ready. As loud or as quiet as you want. For as long as you want. We'll be here." Jaime held the notepad against his chest like a shield, and 3 brothers who had once commanded an empire without flinching sat in a living room and witnessed the single most powerful thing they had ever seen. Person finding his voice. The next 6 weeks were a war fought on 2 fronts, one invisible, one impossibly visible. The invisible front was Dominic Renner. Dennis's intelligence operation ran like a machine. His team tracked Carson Wells's investigation in real time, staying 2 steps ahead, feeding false leads, misdirecting inquiries, creating enough noise in the data to keep Wells chasing phantoms while the real Jaime remained untouched behind the walls of the Moretti estate. Simultaneously, Dennis built the case against Dominic. Financial transactions routed through shell companies. Communications with known associates still active in organized crime. A meeting in Atlantic City that violated the terms of his release. A wire transfer to Carson Wells that constituted witness intimidation. A federal offense that could send Dominic back to prison for 20 years. The file grew thick, airtight, devastating. Kendrick handled the legal architecture, the formal presentation to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the negotiations for Jaime's reactivated protection. The immunity agreements that ensured the Moretti family's cooperation came with guaranteed safety for everyone involved. The assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Thorne, reviewed the file in a conference room in downtown Manhattan and looked at Kendrick with the expression of someone who had just been handed a birthday present he didn't expect. "This is thorough," Thorne observed. "My brother built it. The one with the analytics background. The one who doesn't sleep when someone he cares about is in danger." Thorne closed the file. "We'll move on Renner within the week. Your terms are acceptable: reactivated identity protection, sealed records, federal monitoring of any Renner associates who might continue the search. But I need something from you first. Name it. An explanation. The Morettis don't do favors for the federal government. You certainly don't walk into a U.S. Attorney's office voluntarily. So why, honestly, are you doing this?" Kendrick considered several answers. Chose the true one. "Because a 22-year-old kid who can't walk properly and is just learning to speak again drew me a picture of a coffee cup, and it was the most honest thing anyone has ever given me. And I refuse to let the world take that away from him." Thorne studied him for a long moment. "You know, Moretti, I've been in this job for 19 years. I've dealt with every kind of criminal, every kind of deal, every kind of motivation. But this is the first time someone's traded federal intelligence for an artist. He's not just an artist. Clearly not. The visible front, the one happening inside the house, was Jaime's voice. After that first shattered syllable in the living room, something had unlocked. Not all at once. Not like a dam breaking, but like ice thawing. Slowly, unevenly, with setbacks and breakthroughs that arrived on their own schedule, refusing to be rushed. Jaime worked with a speech therapist 3 times a week. A patient, white-haired man named Dr. Ellison, whom Dennis had researched extensively before hiring. Dr. Ellison specialized in psychogenic voice disorders and approached Jaime's recovery with the same unhurried attention that Jaime applied to his drawings. Structure first, detail later. The first week, Jaime produced vowels. Sounds without meaning, pure tone, the raw material of language, pushed through vocal cords that were physically functional but neurologically rusty. He made these sounds in the privacy of his room, with Dr. Ellison coaching and the door closed and his notepad in his lap as a safety net. The second week, consonants. Hard ones first, the percussive sounds that required force, the TS and KS and PS that his mouth remembered more easily because they were almost like punctuation. He practiced alone, in front of a mirror, watching his lips form shapes that had been dormant since he was 8. The third week, words. Not many, not fluently, but words, real, chosen, specific words that he selected from his notepad and translated into sound with the concentration of someone learning to walk after years in a wheelchair. The first word he spoke to another person was Henry. They were in the garden. Evening light. Tomato plants tall enough now to need staking. Jaime was kneeling in the soil, his brace removed, his bad leg folded carefully, his hands dark with earth. Henry was beside him, tying a plant to a support stake with green twine. Henry. Henry's hands stopped. The twine dangled. Henry. Clearer this time. Rougher than a normal speaking voice. Gravelly, like an engine that hadn't turned over in years. But unmistakable. His name, spoken by the person he had found on a bench 3 months ago. Henry turned. Jaime was looking at him with an expression so earnest, so deliberately brave, that it rearranged something fundamental in Henry's understanding of courage. "Yeah," Henry answered, his voice unsteady. "That's me." Jaime's mouth worked around the next word. Thank you. For stopping. Stopping. Your car. That night. You stopped. Henry sat back on his heels. The garden was quiet around them. The kind of quiet that exists between important moments, the held breath of the world waiting for what comes next. "I almost didn't," Henry admitted. "I was tired. I was late. I almost kept driving." Jaime considered this. Then, with effort that was visible in his jaw and his shoulders and the careful placement of each syllable. "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." Everything, Jaime paused, gathered himself. Everything that's different now is because you didn't. Kendrick heard his name 2 days later. He was in the kitchen. 5 a.m. Coffee maker gurgling. Jaime at the table with his sketchbook. The way they always started their mornings. Kendrick. Kendrick set the coffee pot down. Turned. Jaime was looking at him with that penny-colored gaze, and his mouth was set in the determined line of someone who was going to get through this sentence regardless of how long it took. I want to say something out loud instead of writing it. Take your time. You told me, deep breath, that I was staying, not as a guest, not as charity. You told me that my first morning here, before you knew anything about me. I remember. I've been thinking about why, and I think, another pause. The words were heavy, each one requiring conscious effort to lift from thought to sound. I think you recognized something in me, something you carry too. Kendrick was very still. What do you mean? Damage. The word came out clean, unafraid. You have damage, Kendrick. All three of you do. You built an empire around it, this fortress of power and control, and it works, it keeps you safe, but it doesn't heal anything. It just organizes the pain. Nobody had ever said this to Kendrick Moretti. Nobody had ever dared. And nobody had ever been perceptive enough to see it, to look past the authority and the composure and the strategic mind and find the wound underneath. That morning, Jaime continued, gaining steadiness with each phrase. When you gave me coffee and told me to stay, that wasn't about me. That was about you deciding to do something kind instead of something practical. And I think that was the bravest thing you'd done in a long time. Kendrick's hand rested on the counter. His expression didn't change. Couldn't change, because Kendrick's face was his most reliable tool, and he maintained it even in moments like this one. But his eyes, dark, steady, the same eyes that had gone cold when he watched the camera footage of Atus. His eyes were bright, and the brightness had nothing to do with anger. You see too much, Kendrick murmured. I see exactly enough. Jaime's voice cracked on the last word, and he reached for his notepad instinctively, then stopped, put the pen down, chose sound over ink. I'm learning that some things need to be heard, not read. Dennis's name came last. Fitting, perhaps, for the brother who valued patience above all other virtues. It happened in the study on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day where the light was gray and even in the house felt like the inside of a shell. Dennis was working. Jaime was across the desk, inking a finished version of the logistics diagram that had impressed Dennis weeks earlier. This one expanded, refined, rendered in a style that was half technical illustration and half art. Dennis. Dennis looked up from his screen. I finished the Eastern distribution map, but I changed something. Show me. Jaime slid the drawing across the desk. Dennis studied it. The routing was elegant, cleaner than the original, with 3 new pathways that eliminated the bottleneck entirely. But there was something else. In the corner, small and detailed, Jaime had drawn 3 circles. Interconnected, overlapping, each one labeled with a letter. The N. L. What are these? Your system. Jaime's voice was quiet but clear. The 3 of you overlap, share resources, share load, share risk. But each circle is also complete on its own. That's why it works. Not because you need each other, because you choose each other. Dennis looked at the diagram for a long time. And this, he pointed to a 4th circle, smaller, positioned at the intersection of the 3. Labeled J. That's where I fit, Jaime answered. If you'll have me. Dennis set the drawing down, removed his glasses, cleaned them, a habit he had when he was buying time for his emotions to catch up with his intellect. The system works better with you in it, Dennis spoke. The data supports this. Household efficiency is up. Conflict is down. Creative output has increased measurably. And he paused, replaced his glasses. I look forward to mornings now. That's new. Jaime's mouth curved. Not a smile exactly. Something more fragile and more valuable. The beginning of a smile, the first draft, offered without certainty that it would be received. It was received. Carson Wells found the Moretti estate on a Wednesday. He sat in a rented sedan across the street, binoculars in his lap, photographing the property. He had eliminated all 3 false trails in Portland and narrowed his search to this neighborhood through a combination of medical records. An orthopedic supply company had shipped a custom leg brace to this zip code 6 weeks ago, and disciplined investigative work. He called Dominic Renner at 4 p.m. Found him, Wells reported. The kid's living with a family called Moretti. Big house, gated, security presence. This isn't a shelter situation. He's established here. The Morettis. Dominic's voice was flat, considering. I know that name. You should. They're significant. Whatever you're planning, this isn't going to be simple. I don't need simple. I need an address. Wells gave him the address. What Wells did not know, what he could not have known, because Dennis's counter-surveillance was better than Wells's surveillance, was that the Moretti security team had photographed Wells's vehicle, identified his license plate, and reported his presence to Dennis within 20 minutes of his arrival. By 4:30 p.m., Dennis had the information on Kendrick's desk. By 5 p.m., Kendrick had called Thorne at the U.S. Attorney's Office. By 6 p.m., Thorne had signed the warrant. By 9 p.m., federal agents had arrested Dominic Renner at his apartment in Newark on charges of witness intimidation, conspiracy, and violation of release conditions. Carson Wells was detained as a material witness and his investigation files were seized. By midnight, it was over. Kendrick told Jaime the news in the morning, over coffee. The same table, the same 2 mugs, a different world. Dominic was arrested last night. The federal charges are serious. He won't be released this time. Your protection status has been reactivated. Your identity is secure. Jaime held his coffee mug with both hands. He was quiet for a long time. Not the old silence, the protective silence, but a new kind, a contemplative quiet, the silence of someone who is choosing words rather than being denied them. My father, Jaime began. He gave up everything to do the right thing. Yes, and the cost was me, growing up alone, losing my voice, losing years. Yes. Was it worth it? Kendrick looked at the young man across the table, the artist, the analyst, the person who had walked into this house on crutches and a borrowed jacket and had somehow become the center of gravity for 3 of the most powerful men in the country. I think, Kendrick replied carefully, that your father did what he did because he wanted you to have a life worth living, not just a safe one, a good one. And I think, if he could see you now, he'd say the cost was worth it. Because I'm safe? Because you're loved. Jaime set the mug down. His eyes were clear and steady. I'm learning. That word. What it means. What it feels like. I'm still figuring it out. So are we. The months that followed were not dramatic. They were, instead, something better, ordinary. The beautiful, unremarkable ordinariness of a life shared by people who have chosen each other and keep choosing, every day, through the accumulated weight of small moments. Jaime's voice grew stronger. Not quickly. Dr. Ellison warned that full fluency might take years, and there would always be days when the words retreated and the notepad returned. But the trajectory was upward. By the end of the 2nd month, he could hold short conversations. By the 3rd, he could laugh out loud. A sound so unexpected and wonderful that the first time Henry heard it, he had to leave the room for a minute to compose himself. His drawings evolved too. With stability came ambition. The small sketches gave way to larger works, detailed and confident, exploring subjects and styles that would have been impossible when his whole creative life had been lived in the margins of survival. Dennis arranged an exhibition at a gallery the family knew. 14 pieces, displayed anonymously. They sold out in a week. Jaime stared at the sales report and wrote, because something still felt safer on paper, I can't believe people want to pay for things I see. That, Dennis replied, is literally the definition of art. His leg improved too. Not dramatically. The damage was old and structural, and no amount of surgery or therapy would make it disappear entirely. But a proper brace, consistent physical therapy, and the absence of constant stress allowed his body to function better than it had in years. He still used a crutch sometimes. He still limped. But he moved through the house and the garden and the world with a physicality that suggested comfort rather than apology. And the love, the thing that had been building silently, carefully, in the spaces between words and drawings and shared mornings, the love arrived without announcement. Not as a declaration, not as a grand gesture, not as a climactic moment with swelling music and dramatic lighting. It arrived the way it had always been arriving, through presence, through attention, through the accumulated evidence of 3 men who had restructured their lives around a young man's safety and 300 small drawings pinned to a corkboard in the hallway. Jaime knew it before any of them said it. Of course he did. He was the one who watched, who noticed, who translated invisible things into visible ones. He drew it, a new piece larger than any he had made before. 3 figures, rendered with the photographic precision he had developed over months of practice and confidence. Kendrick, reading at the kitchen table, caught mid-thought, his glasses slightly crooked. Dennis at his desk, 3 monitors glowing, his expression the one he wore when a pattern finally clicked. Henry in the garden, soil on his hands, his face turned toward something off-frame, a half-smile that suggested he had just heard a voice he loved. And in the center of the piece, connecting the 3 scenes like a bridge, a pair of hands. Jaime's hands, one holding a pen, the other open, reaching toward nothing and everything, the fingers slightly curled, the gesture unmistakable. Offering. He hung it on the corkboard without telling anyone. Went to bed. Lay in the dark and listened to the house that had become his home, the walls that held the people who had become his family, the silence that was no longer empty but full, so full of everything he had ever wanted and never dared to name. Henry found it first, at 6 a.m. He stood in the hallway in bare feet, looking at the drawing, and he understood immediately what it was. Not a gift, not an offering, an answer to the question that all 4 of them had been asking, in their own ways, since the night Henry pulled into a parking lot and rolled down his window and a young man with no voice wrote, "Are you safe?" on a notepad. The question was, can this work? And the answer, rendered in pencil on paper, hung on a corkboard between a robin on a branch and a pair of gardening gloves. And it was, yes, it already does. Kendrick came downstairs at 6:15, saw the drawing, saw Henry standing in front of it. Understood. Dennis arrived at 6:22, adjusting his glasses, already thinking about the day's data. He stopped, looked, his hand found Henry's shoulder. The 3 of them stood together in the hallway of their home, looking at a drawing made by a person who had been invisible for 22 years and was finally, fully seen. Jaime's door opened behind them, the tap of a crutch on hardwood. Then silence, the good kind, the kind that exists between people who don't need to speak because everything important has already been said or drawn or understood. "Good morning," Jaime offered. His voice was rough with sleep, tentative but real. "Good morning," 3 voices answered. And the day began the way every day would begin from now on, together in a house with 6 bedrooms and a corkboard gallery and a garden full of things they had planted with their own hands, in a family that had been broken and rebuilt until finally, at last, the pieces fit. Not mechanically, not functionally, not the way a key fits a lock. The way people fit when they choose each other imperfectly, stubbornly, completely. And that is the story of 3 brothers who signed divorce papers over a sketchbook. A young man who found his voice after 14 years of silence. An uncle who learned that grudges don't survive contact with people who refuse to let go of what they love. And a garden on the south side of a house in America where, on any given evening, you might find 4 people sitting in the dirt, talking about tomatoes, drawing the sunset, and building something that nobody can take away. Not an empire, not a dynasty, not a legacy of power. A home. Thank you for staying through all 5 parts of this story. Some endings are worth the wait. This one was always going to land right here with those 4 people in that garden. Go ahead and like this video, share it with someone who believes that kindness is the most underrated kind of strength, and subscribe so the next story finds you just as easily as this one did. We make these for you, and we don't plan on stopping.